So with respect to the discussion of Akrasia, it specifically arises when, and I know that this is a bit complicated, but I don't know how to really make it any easier. When an individual, well, first you begin, if it's the case that actions follow from intent, then it must be the case that those intents which are functional create actions that follow from functional intents. However, we recognize in the case of attempting to quit smoking that I might have the intent to do something but do something different. How do I make sense of that? How do I make sense of having the intent to quit but actually not quitting? The way I make sense of that is recognizing that I have an unknown functional intent, right? There is something that is functional that is unknown to me, and that is the desire to actually continue smoking. I think, however, that I don't want to, I do want to quit, but I don't. So I have an unknown functional intent and the known action. This known action cannot correspond with this, right? The known action cannot correspond with what I think I want to do. It corresponds with what the actual intent was. So just to make sure that this is clear, if this is the Akrasia individual, and this is the action, and the action is that I continue to smoke, I may think, you can think of intent as two levels, right? The question is, if this is the real association, if this is the real association, and this is what I think the association is, we recognize that this has to be the unknown functional intent. And we'll just abbreviate it UFI, right? So we'll abbreviate this UFI. So that the unknown functional intent is this. This becomes what I assume to be functional, right? So this is the assumed functional intent, right? I assume that this is the case, when in fact this is actually the case. This is the unknown functional intent. I assume that this is the case, and that's why my action is akratic, right? That's why my action is akratic, because I assume this to be my actual desire, my actual intent, when in fact, unbeknownst to even myself, this was what was being functional, and that's why there's a seeming disassociation between my intent and my action, when in reality, there is an association between my intent and my action. It was just it, being the intent, was unknown to me, right? So it is a bit tricky, right? Akrasia is not necessarily, and that's why I said weakness. It's far more complicated than just describing it in terms of a weakness of will. It is more of our cognitive inability to access even our own intentionality, right? You would assume that intent being private and subjective, I would have the ability to access my own intents. However, as we've realized, I can have the intent to quit smoking, but I don't quit smoking. I assume that this is functional, when in fact, unbeknownst to me, this is functional. The fact that this is functional makes sense of the correspondence between my intent and my action, and thus I realized that this was only an assumed function, right? Maybe I thought I really wanted to quit, but I really didn't. In retrospect, I looked at it, yeah, I wasn't ready yet. There were some certain factors and so on and so forth. So we sort of rationalize after the fact. It's easy to do that after the fact. What's difficult is to analyze your intent in the moment, right? While the event is taking place. That's far more difficult, and you really, really have to be in touch with your desires, your intent, and what it is that you really want, right? So being true to yourself is important. Obviously, Akrasia is more than just a weakness of will at its basis, right? At its basis, and this is sort of logically true, Akrasia is really self-deception. Right? At its basis, Akrasia is actually self-deception. So that I am deceiving myself. I make the assumption that this desire is functional, when in fact, the desire is not functional, and there is an unknown functional intent, right? There's this unknown functional intent that I have, and that's really what my desire is. So that I can actually deceive myself. I can trick myself into believing that I actually want to quit smoking when in fact I don't. And I believe that I want to quit, but I don't. The action is that I don't. The question is, how is there a dissonance, a discord between the intent and the desire? How did I actually deceive myself, right? Because you can strap this person to the polygraph and say, do you want to quit smoking? And they say, yes, I absolutely do. Do you want to quit doing any act, right? Action X. And they say, yes, I really do. But they don't. The question is, why is it that they don't? Because what they haven't recognized is the disassociation between what they think they want and what they actually want. And this disassociation is more than a weakness of will. I would more clearly classify it as self-deception. They think they know what they want, but they don't, and thus that is what akrasia is. So just to wrap this up, akrasia is the disassociation within an akratic individual between the intent and the action. The individual may have an intent to do something or to not do something, and that intent does not correspond with the action. Where there's a discord between the intent and the action, we call it akrasia, and we call the individual akratic. It is sort of generally described as a weakness of will. I more specifically describe it as self-deception, and what I just described was an attempt to explain the notion of akrasia. So I hope that was informative. Kept it pretty brief. If I went a little too fast, just watch the video again and it'll make sense. So thank you for watching my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Goodbye.